Canada, a country known for its snow-covered landscapes, maple syrup, hockey. But hidden beneath this familiar image lies one of the world's richest oil reserves, a story few outside its borders truly know. Why isn't Canada's oil as well known internationally? How critical is it to Canada's prosperity? And what challenges and opportunities lie ahead for this vital industry? Today, we journey into the heart of Canada's oil story. Its past, its present, and its future. Believe it or not, Canada's oil story actually kicks off way back in 1858 in a tiny Ontario town called Oil Springs. There, a man named James Miller Williams drilled North America's very first commercial oil well. The big game changer came in 1947 when a major oil discovery was made in Ludac, Alberta. This was one of the most significant oil discoveries in Canadian history, as it revealed massive oil reserves deep beneath the prairie lands of Alberta. The discovery of oil in Ludac sparked an oil boom in Alberta, marking the beginning of its rise as Canada's oil powerhouse. In 1967, the Athabasca oil sands in northern Alberta were developed for commercial production. The Suncor base plant began operation and produced 1 million barrels of oil in its first year.
In the development of the oil industry.
In the 80s, Canada struck oil again, this time offshore, near Newfoundland and Labrador. The Hibernia oil field, discovered in 1979 and brought online in the 90s, brought a whole new wave of prosperity to the East Coast. In more recent years, significant shale oil deposits have been discovered, with a large portion of it in Alberta and British Columbia. Shale oil, extracted from shale rock, has become an important contributor to Canada's overall oil production, thanks to advancements in fracking technology. According to Natural Resources Canada, shale oil, also known as tight oil, accounted for more than 10% of the country's total crude oil production in 2014. Today, Canada is one of the major players in the oil industry. In 2023, Canada produced about 5.7 million barrels of oil per day, making it the fourth largest producer in the world. Canada also holds the fourth largest proven oil reserves globally, with an estimated 171 billion barrels, ranking just behind Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Approximately 97% of Canada's oil reserves are found in oil sands. The remaining 3% are located in conventional, offshore, and tight oil formations. Now, you might be wondering, if Canada's oil deposits are so vast, why isn't Canadian oil as well known internationally as that of the US or the oil giants of the Middle East? Well, the answer is a bit more complex than you might think. Let's break it down into 4 key factors: export reach, oil type, branding, and geopolitical influence. First off, export reach. Most of Canada's oil goes to one place, the United States. Meanwhile, oil from the Middle East and the US is shipped worldwide, giving them far greater influence over global supply and prices. Why does Canada send so much oil south? One reason is refining capacity. Canada's oil infrastructure is relatively small and aging, compared to its massive production. Crude oil production averaged 4.6 million barrels per day in Canada during 2023, nearly 3 times the country's 1.7 million barrels per day refinery capacity. As of 2024, Canada operates just 17 refineries. The US, on the other hand, runs 125 refineries and handles around 18 million barrels daily. Many Canadian refineries, especially those in eastern Canada, were originally designed to process lighter crude oil, not the heavy crude produced from the oil sands. But US Gulf Coast refineries, especially in Texas and Louisiana, are perfectly equipped to handle heavy crude. Now, you might ask, can't Canada simply ship its crude overseas, to Europe or Asia, instead of relying on US buyers? In theory, yes, but moving oil by pipeline south is far cheaper and faster than shipping it across oceans. The reason? Canada has very limited pipeline access to its own west and east coasts. Sure, there were projects like Northern Gateway and Energy East that could have opened up global markets. But due to political, environmental, and economic roadblocks, these projects were either cancelled or blocked. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is the only major pipeline linking Canada to the Pacific. Its expansion project began commercial operations in 2024 after 12 years of construction and a cost that soared to 34 billion Canadian dollars. That's why, as of 2023, nearly 97% of Canada's crude oil exports still flow directly to the US. Now, let's look at the type of oil produced by Canada. A lot of Canada's oil, particularly from the oil sands, is heavy crude, meaning it contains more sulfur and is much thicker than conventional oil. Bitumen is the oil component of oil sands. To put it into perspective, if light crude flows like syrup, bitumen is more like peanut butter, thick, sticky, and doesn't flow naturally at room temperature. Processing bitumen is no simple task. Extracting it from the oil sands is far more complex and expensive than conventional methods. For shallower deposits, surface mining is used, involving massive machinery and large-scale excavation. For deeper reservoirs, companies rely on in-situ techniques such as steam-assisted gravity drainage, a process that injects steam underground to loosen the bitumen so it can be pumped to the surface. Once extracted, the bitumen is upgraded to a lighter, more marketable form of crude oil. Global buyers tend to prefer light, sweet crude because it's easier and cheaper to refine into gasoline and diesel. In the oil industry, two key benchmarks are Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate, WTI for short. Brent crude originates from oil fields in the North Sea and serves as a pricing reference for many oils produced in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. WTI represents oil produced in the US. Both Brent and WTI are considered light and sweet crudes, meaning they are low in sulfur and easier to refine. In contrast, Western Canadian Select, WCS for short, is Canada's benchmark crude oil. Take a look at this graph comparing WCS prices to WTI, the US benchmark. You'll notice that WCS consistently trades at a lower price. Why the gap? It's simply because the Canadian crude oil is heavier, has higher carbon intensity, and requires additional transportation and processing to bring it to market. All of this lowers its market value compared to lighter, sweeter crudes. Now, in terms of oil branding, countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE invest heavily in promoting their oil globally. From OPEC initiatives to Formula One sponsorships by Aramco, Saudi Arabia's state oil company, they actively brand themselves as essential to the world's energy future. According to a 2024 report by the New Weather Institute, a climate-focused think tank, Aramco has spent an estimated $1.3 billion on sports sponsorships, a strategy critics call sports washing, aimed at boosting the public image of oil companies and fossil fuel-rich states. Canada, in contrast, has no national oil marketing campaign. While large companies like Suncor and Cenovus promote their own brands, there is no coordinated federal effort to market Canadian oil internationally. Since Canada exports only about 3% of its crude oil outside North America, there has been little incentive to launch expensive global marketing campaigns like those of Saudi Arabia or the UAE. At the same time, environmental groups like Greenpeace and 350.org have long labeled Alberta's oil sands as dirty oil, a phrase that significantly influenced global perceptions and cast a shadow over Canada's energy image. Now let's talk about geopolitical influence. Unlike major players like Saudi Arabia or the US, Canada isn't part of OPEC or OPEC+, the powerful alliances that influence global oil prices and production. According to the International Energy Agency, OPEC+ accounted for approximately 51% of global oil production in 2023 and 80% of known reserves, and its coordinated production cuts, such as those between 2022 and 2023, often contributed to notable short-term oil price movements. The U.S. also exerts significant geopolitical influence in the global oil industry. It is the world's largest economy, a top oil producer, and a major holder of strategic petroleum reserves. The U.S. shale boom transformed the country into a leading exporter of crude and petroleum products, reducing its reliance on foreign oil and increasing its sway in global energy markets. It uses economic tools, such as sanctions on major oil-producing nations like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, to influence geopolitical outcomes and restrict rival oil revenues. Its control over financial systems, energy trade routes, and military presence in key regions further amplifies its ability to shape global oil supply and policy decisions. Canada, by contrast, leaves oil production largely to the free market and doesn't wield oil as a tool of foreign policy. With limited engagement in global energy alliances, Canada remains what some call a quiet energy giant. So, how much does Canada's oil industry contribute to the national economy? In 2023, oil and gas extraction contributed around 5% of Canada's total GDP. Sectors like real estate, manufacturing, and healthcare take a bigger slice of the pie. But hold on, there's a reason oil's slice of the pie isn't bigger. While oil's a huge player, Canada mostly exports crude oil, not refined products. When oil is refined into gasoline, diesel, or petrochemicals, it generates significantly more economic value. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. refineries earn between $10 to $20 more per barrel on Canadian crude after they've processed it into finished fuels. But it's not just about money, oil also creates jobs. In 2023, about 180,000 Canadians were directly employed in the oil and natural gas industry, and approximately 450,000 if you count the indirect ones. That sounds like a lot, right? But it's only 2% of Canada's total workforce. Because oil and gas are capital-intensive industries, meaning they require more machines and investment than large numbers of workers. Still, oil's economic footprint is significant. It's Canada's #1 export by value. In 2023, oil and gas exports totaled over 177 billion Canadian dollars, nearly 23% of all exports. Put simply, nearly 1 in every 4 export dollars comes from oil and gas. Now, let's zoom in on provincial impacts. Here's a quick summary of oil and gas extraction's contribution to each province's GDP in 2023. The sector plays a particularly important role in Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Saskatchewan, Canada's top 3 oil-producing provinces. Alberta, which produces about 80% of Canada's oil, collected 25.2 billion Canadian dollars in oil and gas royalties in 2022 to 2023, approximately 33% of its total government revenue. With trade tensions rising between Canada and the US, a big question lingers. Could Canada start building more refineries and pipelines at home instead of relying so heavily on the US? Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. First off, let's talk about costs. Building a brand new refinery is a massive investment. We're talking anywhere between 10 to 15 billion Canadian dollars. That's not pocket change. And then there are the pipelines. Take the Trans Mountain Expansion project, for example. The original estimate for the pipeline was 5.4 billion Canadian dollars, but the price tag has skyrocketed to over 35 billion Canadian dollars in 2024. Why are these projects so expensive? One reason is investor hesitation. There's growing concern over energy transition risks, the idea that oil demand could decline in the future as the world shifts toward greener energy. And then there's the long payoff period. Some projects take decades to become profitable. For instance, the Trans Mountain Expansion project took approximately 12 years from proposal to completion. There's also the environmental impact. Canada has some of the strictest environmental regulations in the world. Every major energy project must undergo rigorous impact assessments, extensive consultations with Indigenous communities, and can face significant legal challenges. According to the Vancouver Sun, in 2019, there were 12 proposed legal challenges to the Trans Mountain Pipeline project, 6 of which the Federal Court of Appeal allowed to proceed. Politics also play a major role. Oil-rich provinces like Alberta push for more pipelines and refineries, while provinces like British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario prioritize climate action and green energy. This divide makes national approval for new projects an uphill battle. One major casualty was the Energy East pipeline, which aimed to transport Alberta's oil to eastern Canada. After strong opposition, especially from Quebec, the project was cancelled in 2017.
There are people who see these projects from different points of view. There are those who are focused most on economic growth and less on environmental stewardship. There are others who want to keep oil in the ground. There are those who don't understand the importance of our constitutional obligations to consult with Indigenous communities. We understand all 3 of those pillars.
As a result, refineries in Quebec, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada still import U.S. crude due to a lack of pipeline access to Western Canadian oil. Given all these realities, it's been far more practical and economical for Canada to export crude oil to existing U.S. refineries instead of taking on the enormous cost and risk of building new ones at home. In fact, no major new refinery has been built in Canada since 1984, nearly 40 years ago. Looking ahead, Mark Carney's win in Canada's April 2025 federal election has sparked a lot of curiosity about where the country's oil industry is headed. With tensions rising between Canada and the US, Carney has acknowledged something that's been a long-standing issue. We need more pipelines at home.
It's about getting things done. It's about getting, yes, pipelines built across this country so that we can displace imports of foreign oil. It's about building out the energy infrastructure more broadly.
That said, Carney hasn't committed to building them just yet. He's signaled that any project needs broad support and a clear environmental case. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Before becoming Prime Minister, Carney was well known on the global stage for championing climate action. In 2021, he helped launch the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ for short, a coalition formed during the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. In a 2022 report titled The Managed Phase-Out of High-Emitting Assets, GFANZ stated that companies owning or investing in carbon-intensive assets, such as coal or heavy oil, should gradually wind down their operations to remain eligible for continued investment capital. At the same time, he voiced support for mining critical minerals that are essential for things like electric vehicles and battery storage. So, how do these positions line up? That leads to a big question. If we don't develop more of our oil and gas, what are we giving up? According to the Canadian Energy Centre, Canada's oil, gas, and coal assets were worth $1.6 trillion in 2022, or about $41,000 per Canadian. Choosing to leave these resources in the ground means giving up a lot of potential revenue and economic opportunity. So the challenge becomes, how do we balance economic growth, energy independence, and climate responsibility? One promising direction is investing in cleaner technologies. Canada could lead the world in producing low-emission oil. For instance, the Pathways Alliance, made up of major players like Suncor, Cenovus, and Canadian Natural Resources Limited, has proposed a $16.5 billion carbon capture project that could cut oil sands emissions by 22 million tons of carbon dioxide a year by 2030. That's a major step forward. We could also reduce emissions by powering oil sands operations with clean electricity. Think hydro, renewables, or even small modular nuclear reactors. This could help Canada produce what some are calling net zero oil, which would appeal to countries looking to cut their carbon footprints but still needing reliable energy. And it's not just about the oil itself. Canada can also lead by publishing environmental data, such as emissions, water use, and land reclamation. This transparency can attract ESG-minded investors and support economic growth. While Canada doesn't yet have federally mandated climate disclosure rules for corporations, the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board released a voluntary, internationally aligned climate disclosure framework in December 2024. So, while there's no easy path forward, there's a real opportunity here. Canada's oil industry stands at a defining moment. With the right blend of smart technology, environmental responsibility, and thoughtful decision-making, Canada has the chance to lead in a world that demands both energy security and climate action. The choices made now will shape not only the future of Canada's oil industry, but its place in the global energy story. What do you think lies in the future for Canada's oil? If there are other topics you'd like to explore, please let me know in the comments below. Also, remember to hit that subscribe button for future videos. Thanks for watching.